So, Miss Kayla, we ready back there? Okay, wonderful. Welcome, everybody, to this wonderful, hot evening. For those who are here, you get extra credit for coming tonight because it is so warm. And you also had Frankie Kilcullen's famous crab dip. So that was worth coming out right there, let me tell you. For those who I have not had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Nancy Easterling. I have the honor of being the executive director here at Historic Sotterley. And whether you're joining us virtually, online, or you're here in person, this is going to be a very, very special evening. If you're joining online, please do sign into the chat. Let us know where you're joining from tonight. And don't feel bad that you can't be here in person to get a book. At the end of the evening, though we're going to be doing book sales and book signings here, reach out to Joy Lowe and our museum store and visitor center administrator. She will get you hooked up, I promise. So Joy is here giving me the thumbs up right now. She'll make that happen. So this is a special evening to us for a lot of reasons, not least of which is the wonderful person who we're hosting tonight. So when we have special books that come out, we're always very pleased to bring them. But this one has special meaning to us, and it's because of Merideth. We had a book that we hosted, a book launch that we hosted earlier this year from Donald Barber, who was a former trustee here at Sotterley. And it was a wonderful book that he and Dave Brown, who's with us tonight, wrote and introduced, and the community is embracing. And in that book, one of the things that Donald Barber said he was the most proud of was the fact that he brought Merideth Taylor onto the board. And I will say at Sotterley, there are people that come into your life that make a profound difference. And Merideth is one of those people. Merideth was on our interpretation committee, and she was the project lead for some of the most instrumental projects that have changed the course of the way that we do things here at Historic Sotterley. She got an IMLS grant for us, an extraordinarily hard grant to get. She got it and created a new guided tour for us, an introductory video, a self-guided tour for us. I remember Michael Whitson, former president of the Sotterley Board, a trustee emeritus, said, "Oh my God, we're a real museum now." When he came the day that it launched, it was just incredible. Merideth also, for those of you who haven't been in it, shame on you, you need to come back. But our Land, Lives, and Labor exhibit was our very first permanent exhibit. And it brings to life the people on whose sweat equity this site was built. And from the ground up, Merideth led this. Jeannie Pirtle, our education director at the time, helped with this as well. Dave Brown helped. So many people helped with this, but Merideth was the project lead. And it still stands as an incredible exhibit. And a National Park Service gentleman who came one day said, "That is one of the best exhibits I've seen to talk about the people who labor on a site, whether they were enslaved or post-emancipation. It brought people to life." It was incredible. We have on our website a Talking and Walking Common Ground video that Merideth created talking about our Common Ground initiative and our Descendants project. If you watch this incredible video, which we aired 2 years ago, you're going to really capture what this is about. And the book that that Merideth is going to be talking about tonight, the proceeds are actually going to support that program because of her generosity. This is a person that we get to host tonight, and she's family. And she served on the board for a decade. And she's still with us all the time. She can't escape. So I have to now read just a tiny bio. I won't make it really long, Merideth, but she is a professor emeritus of theater and dance at St. Mary's College of Maryland and a founding member of the African and African Diaspora and Women's Studies program at the college. She is author of Listening In, Echoes and Artifacts from Maryland's Mother Country, co-editor of In Relentless Pursuit of an Education, African American Stories from a Century of Segregation, and screenwriter-director of documentaries with All Deliberate Speed, One High School Story, and the Telly Award-winning Talking and Walking Common Ground. I just have to read, and some of these are in your book, but former trustee Iris Carter Ford, who's also a descendant from Montpelier, wrote, "Merideth Taylor is a storyteller. It's in the eyes that capture evocative images of the pedestrian. It's in the voice that imagines both the dissonance and harmony of humanity. It is in the soul that dances with the eyes and the voice to illuminate the boundless grace and wonder in making a way out of no way. Enjoy Merideth Taylor at her best." So tonight she's going to share a little excerpts from the book, and hopefully, Merideth, maybe you'll tell us a little bit about your inspiration as well. So join me in welcoming Merideth Taylor.
Okay, so Kayla, we're ready. Well, that was absolutely incredible. I think that's quite enough for the evening. Wow. And, Donald Barber is just the best compliment giver in the world. And I'm going to do both the things that you mentioned. I think because a lot of people probably haven't seen the book and don't know anything about it, what the format is or what it's about, that I should share some stories and photographs from the book. And I thought, since I am at Sotterley, Sotterley was an inspiration for the book, and a lot of the stories come from Sotterley history, but it was only one of the places, and the story is not about one particular plantation or any particular character. And it's more of a composite. But so tonight I thought that I would share those that are most directly drawn from Sotterley history, and in particular from the oral history of an iconic person, a Sotterley person, Iris, not Iris, put that one, those wonderful compliments. No, I'm talking about Agnes Kane Callum, all right? So iconic at Sotterley, Agnes Kane Callum. And her oral histories, the book is dedicated to Agnes, and her oral histories have enriched everyone. They've been shared across the country, across the state, as well as at Sotterley. And I had the honor of interviewing Agnes when Sotterley was doing an oral history project. And I was very much inspired by that, and then got to know her better. And even as she aged and was not really able to join us in the projects as I would have liked to, I would call her up, and if she was available and in the mood, we would have some long chats in the evenings. And I learned so much from her. So I do want to share three, and I'm hoping, I know some of you are Sotterley aficionados, and hopefully people that have joined online, some of the descendants are here and are very familiar with these stories. So the names have been changed, except for one, and some of the details have been changed because I haven't been able to do a straight nonfiction because there simply isn't enough information, and I do not feel free to put words into the mouth of a character that lived in the 17 or 1800s who is not, in fact, my direct ancestor especially. So I want to talk about this a little bit about where each story that I used was drawn from. So the first photograph is the schoolroom. And is this familiar to most of you who have been to Sotterley have seen this. This is the schoolroom at Sotterley. Okay, and I am not the ideal narrator. I would not be casting myself in these characters, but I must read. Okay, schoolroom. As he moved between the desks, sweeping, Joe suddenly stopped and bent down to pick up a small piece of white paper with black markings. He guessed the corner of a page from one of the school books had gotten torn off. How careless to tear a precious book. Joe was forbidden to touch the schoolroom books unless it was to pick them up off the floor and place them on the shelf. But he had peeked in the window and seen the children read and sing from them. Studying the markings, he saw some letters and some other markings like dots with little wings attached and lines. Something to do with music, maybe, he thought. He carefully placed the scrap under his hat. He kept on sweeping, but his mind was on that paper. When he finished cleaning, he'd go find Mr. Jasper, the fiddler man, and show it to him. Ask him what it says. Fiddler man knew a lot. He was helping Joe make something African called a banjo. He was going to learn to play it and make some powerful music. And that is the schoolroom. Okay, we will move on to another one drawn directly from Agnes Callum's histories of her family. Plasterer. Henry liked to mix his own putty, combining lime, oyster shell, sand, and hog's hair for the coarse stuff. For the final coat, he'd leave out the sand and hair so the finished wall would look smooth and white as the mistress' hand. He prided himself on that, and his work was much in demand. He was using his trowel to load a fresh batch of putty onto the hock when he heard his Elsa's voice outside the window, gently chiding the colonel's children. She sounded tired and out of patience, but Henry smiled. Master Billings had rented him out to the colonel to do the plastering work, and it meant he could spend the night with Elsa and their children in her quarters. Henry started whistling and went back to work with the trowel, looking forward to story time tonight with his young'uns, and best of all, being able to hold Elsa close the whole night through. He was thinking about the coins, too, coins that Billings let him keep from the colonel's fee. He'd add them to the Freedom Papers tin he kept hidden on a little shelf inside Elsa's cabin chimney. And one more from Agnes's oral histories. Stables, the stables. Fred finished, did we move on? Next, sorry. This is the stables. I forget, I have to tell you. Fred finished mixing together the witch hazel, calendula, and oil of wormwood liniment, and began applying to Champ's leg just above the hock. He'd slept in the stable with Blind Ben, and they'd started work before first light, mucking out, bringing in fresh hay, fodder, and buckets of oats for all the horses. He worked his way through grooming the riding horses while Ben worked over the carriage horses, and when he brushed Champ, Fred noticed the swelling and felt the warmth of the hock. He hoped the liniment would ease the swelling, and with luck, Champ would be ready for the races in Leonardtown come fair day. Fred was young, but already the doctor's favorite groom, and he usually got to travel along with the horses. He looked forward to all the bustle of market day, talking to folk from other plantations, smelling the vendors' goods, and getting a peek at the rich folks in their finery. As long as he saw to Champ, he had freedom to go about the town a little. The doctor trusted him not to run off. They had an understanding. The doctor knew that no matter the freedom of travel he allowed Fred, The boy would not run as long as his mother and sisters and brother were safe from being sold. Young as he was, Fred had bartered like a man. Okay, so those three were as close to the specific oral histories, and unlike most of the stories, which are more disguised in a way and not as close to the actual history. And so just a few things about these. There's always a mix of actual documented fact, and then there is some what some scholars have called critical fabulation, a use of imagination to fill some of the gaps between the historical record that we have. Because when you're talking about slavery, it's very difficult to come up with. You can document. People are doing wonderful work in genealogy, documenting the family line, where people were, and maybe what positions they had, but knowing really very much about what the actual day-to-day, everyday experience is very, very difficult, because people were not allowed to learn to read, people were not allowed to learn to write, and so we have very few records from people who actually experienced it. And so this is just the decision that can we tell the story in a way that reflects the truth as best we can, but also allows us enough detail to imagine what people are feeling, to imagine what people are saying, and to be able to imagine, in other words, someone who is not you. And I think it's really important to be able to do that. It's been used very badly in our history in terms of creating stereotypes, of misrepresenting people who could not speak for themselves. So we have a terrible history, and we've become very afraid of trying to tell stories about each other because of this terrible history we have. But I ventured out, and I think it's worth it, because I think we need to learn more about what it was like as best we can. So what I did was to think about what each story has something to teach us or tell us about what slavery was like, or what I think it may have been like. And so Agnes gave us a lot of information, but we know that Joe, in fact, cleaned. His job was to clean, among many other jobs, undoubtedly, was to clean the schoolrooms. And so we know that. We know that people created musical instruments based on African instruments or on new instruments that they created. They certainly had drums and the banjo created, and we know they made music. And we can assume that there was that people may have felt that there's some value in learning to read, that they knew that was a power that was being kept from them. So all of those things were important to me to try to suggest. And the plasterer, I don't know, I mean, some people here may know, who are we talking about with the plasterer? And he is a direct ancestor of Agnes Callan. And I changed, instead of, in this story, they talk about the colonel instead of the doctor. And what else has changed? We changed the names, but what are the important facts that come across? That these people, a lot of these skilled people were rented out, and that was extremely popular, especially in an area like this, where it was rural area, and there were not, it was easy to send someone to someone else for a period of time to do the work that needed to be done. We know that Hillary was a very talented, very skillful, I don't know if he was talented, sorry, very skillful plasterer. And I researched something, kind of quick and easy research about the actual act of plastering at that period of time. And, we have this incredible Google that makes some kinds of research when it comes to just like a technical thing, especially, or a history of agriculture. It's unbelievable what there is online. So it makes it so much easier. But it does reflect, and the fact that in this case, Hillary and his wife, who is, I think, maybe more in laundry than in childcare, but there were certainly Black childcare workers, lived separately. So they would not be able to spend every night together. So being able to be rented out on a plantation that had your loved one, was an incredible advantage. And sadly, when it wasn't. Right. So the stable, Fred, the groom, is actually Frank in Agnes's stories, and he was a groom, and he was a skilled groom. And we do know that Frank, like many others, didn't run and was trusted to go. At least in Maryland, it maybe was a little bit easier to be able to travel alone as an enslaved person. But he was trusted to go on his own various places, because the deal was, you don't sell my family, I don't run away. And, so they made these really important agreements. And we know that happened here, as far as we know, that happened here. So all of the stories, to me, are I hope they work as stories, and that they capture our imagination, and that we can empathize with the people, but they also, to me, are educational. There are specific things I want to convey about what the situation was. So unless somebody's dying to say something right now, I will go on and do another one. Okay. So this is the blacksmith. Okay. That is correct. A lot of the photographs in the book were taken at Sotterley. So even if the stories had nothing to do with what I know of Sotterley history, its presence is here in the photographs. And these shackles, I think they're reproductive. They're not reproductions. They're not real, but they are in the Land, Lives, and Labor exhibit that Nancy mentioned in the corn crib. And I took them out of the case so you can go and see them, all right? And I hope you will. If you have not seen the Land, Lives, and Labor exhibit in the corn crib, you really need to do it. I took them out and put them on what Sotterley had for a blacksmith site, which is a little lacking, but but it's just a picture. Okay, blacksmith. Big George preferred working at the forge in the late afternoon shade, when he could see the colors best and know just when to pull the metal out of the coals and get it on the anvil before it got too white hot. Of course, he had no choice about much of anything when Mr. Devil Thomas was strutting around the yards and stables, kicking the dogs and swearing at one and all. Never a kind word to any of them, and always riding him the hardest, accusing him of slacking and finding fault with his smithing. George banged his hammer down on the shackle fittings again and again, mouthing a curse at Thomas with each blow. When the overseer finally rode out to the fields to spread more misery, George slipped into the darkened shed, lifted the leather pouch off the hook in the corner where it hung, and drew out the piece of wrought iron. Keeping it close to his body, he walked back to the forge and worked the bellows with his foot to give new life to the fire. A nice bright orange yellow was what he wanted. He laid the oblong piece of wrought iron on the anvil and picked up a smaller hammer for the work of shaping a knife. So I hope you heard that thread at the end. Okay, so that was not from any particular oral history. It was, of course, a skill that many had, or some had, and my belief that there was always or often revenge in the backs of many people's mind. Okay. And then just for something that came from a very different place, a place more of academic research on slavery practices in Southern Maryland. And these are all from Southern Maryland, tobacco plantation sites. Okay, the next one, next slide, is called Sick Out. That is Sotterley. Mags came out on the portico to start her sweeping, but paused at the sight of the two men. What a contrast. Master, standing there, chest thrust out, fists clenched, bursting with the energy and sweat of a building rage. And Bert, slumped pitifully against the wagon backboard, head lolling to the side and hands limply holding the reins, like he was on the verge of death. She started sweeping, but her ear was tuned to what Bert was saying. Sorry, Master, I sure want to be out there getting that tobacco in. I know how much you want to get in the barn, but this terrible sickness just come on me all of a sudden, and I'm not worth a thing. Worse yet, seems like it's spreading like wildfire. Almost the whole crew took to their beds. I just dragged myself up here to tell you, let you know how bad off we are, struck down by this thing right in the middle of harvest, and how we're just as sorry as we can be. Missy Ann came out onto the portico, and Mags quickly picked up the pace of her sweeping, eyes on the ground, but a smirk on her face. She figured they might get a day or two rest from the fields, but Master'd be sending Fred for the doctor, and that'd be the end of their fooling. Still. So I hope I laid on the sarcasm enough. So they also had, I didn't bring it to read, but the sick out, also there's one called Slow Down. And this was just one of, I was very interested in what the strategies were or might have been to among the workers to get rest, to get rid of an overseer that they wanted to get rid of, to protect themselves. And so also the slowdown is exactly what it sounds like, that they work as in unison in a slow motion pitch. And no matter how angry, this may bring on, of course, retribution, in which case, but that story stresses the fact that they all had agreed ahead of time, that everyone knew that they had to be in it together, so that no one person would be able to be singled out and punished. So so that's what, And Mags does reappear some. This does not have a linear plot. It's not a novel, and a lot of the characters only appear once, and then are gone. It does move over time, and some of the characters do reappear, and Mags is one of those. So did we all understand that he was putting the master on? That was the intention. Okay. So one more. This is based on some Sotterley history that also many people know. And it's titled Escape. They removed the branches covering the small boat and slid it out into the creek, letting the July warm water close around their knees, excuse me, before climbing in. Sorry. So July warm water climbing in, before they climb in. The night was silent, but for the crickets, tree frogs, and an owl hooting far off. They'd chosen well. The sliver of a new moon in a cloudy sky gave them the protection of darkness. They picked up the paddles they'd fashioned from salvaged boards and dipped them in, taking care not to splash. Hugging the shore, they reached the mouth of the creek and headed downriver. Peregrine, in the bow, turned his head and lifted his hand to signal caution. Moses drew in his breath and froze, listening. Was that the creaking of wood? Oars slapping the water? And were they even headed in the right direction? They knew a British ship had been seen up one of the creeks on the far side of the river, but would it still be there? And would the sailors welcome them aboard or shoot them as they approached before they could tell them that they'd come to join with their master's enemy if it meant gaining their freedom? They knew the risks. Moses had discovered the old half-submerged boat in the fall, and they had worked on it in secret, slipping away from the quarters at night. The hardest part for the brothers was keeping it from Mama till the last minute, so that no amount of tears and pleading would stop them. They told her they would come back for her. They're promising freedom, Mama. We got to go. So that was inspired by the choice and the fact that Sotterley, in fact, had many escapees. And there were escapees, especially in the War of 1812, but also in the Revolutionary War. And I know less about what specifically happened with that. And one of the ways that I suggested the movement through history in the book is through the wars that happen occasionally throughout. So that it's the history is suggested, but there's no clear, definite timeline. But it does end. The stories end with the emancipation, which was a moment of hope. A moment of hope. So, well, it's very warm, and maybe we're getting drowsy. So, are there any questions? Maybe I am. Are there any questions at this point?
Well, so for those people who are online, I want you to be able to hear the questions. So Catherine Humphreys is in the back of the room monitoring the computer, and there she's doing her Princess Di wave. You guys can't see her online. But if you're online, please, if you have a question, she will give it voice and she will let us know. Here in the room, just give me a moment to run over to you and not trip so that I can have you ask the question into the microphone. I do want to take a moment because I was so excited to get Merideth up here. I did not think to say thank you to our sponsor for the evening, Toyota of Southern Maryland, which we wouldn't be able to do this live streaming if not for them. So I want to thank them so much for this and for being able to get this recorded. So we have this forever and ever, which is wonderful. We're excited. So if anybody has a question, please just raise your hands. And Catherine, let me know if you have something. So does anybody have a question so far? Miss Jan over here. Give me one moment. Sotterley, nope. Everybody needs to hear your cute little voice. Give me a second.
Well, this picture here is amazing. Where did you take that, Meredith?
In the St. Mary's River.
You know, it's, wow. Looks like that boat's been through quite a bit.
Yeah, we were canoeing and came upon it. So that was long before the book started. So I have a lot of photographs.
Well,
yeah,
I
and
love
actually, one of the things that I enjoyed most was trying to figure out how to illustrate, in a sense, the stories. Thanks.
Meredith, one question that I had for you was, what did the idea for the book come first, or were you compiling pictures that started to tell a story, or did you come up with the stories and then took pictures for it? What was your order there?
With this, as opposed to my book and listening in, which was a response to the photos, this is exactly the opposite. The stories came first, and I mean, in some cases, I had to figure out when I came up with an idea of something I wanted to talk about. I had to think, how can I, you know, in whatever, in our everyday lives here, and luckily the access to the historic sites that are around us, which was, you know, wonderful to have. But, you know, I'd look around at my own possessions. I had this little rocking chair. You know, I'd have to come up with some way. And some of the, I started off with the idea of doing tools, basically focusing on tools, because it was going to focus on labor and work. And some of the tools that are still around haven't changed that much. Like we had those plastering tools at the house. And there's a plow in one of the stories that's here. But I also, then there were some that I really couldn't think of a literal kind of illustration. So with, there's one on a midwife, and there's actually a plant with a lot of seeds, a milkweed with a lot of seeds. And I just thought, you know, that fit. And so some of them are more metaphors, some of the photos, and others are just directly, you know, literal tools. And in this one, I'm sure some of them, and none of them are, well, there are some from the historical sites that are really period, but otherwise some of them are not really actual, you know, in the right period, but they represent in a way that I thought worked. And also it was really fun and interesting going around like a milk cow. I had a cow that was a right period from historic St. Mary's City. And I loved the photo, but the cow did not have a full udder. In fact, it had no udder that you could see. And the story is about a woman milking. And so this made it all the way to the copy editor. And at that point they said, so, because I thought, oh, well, you know, it's not real anyway. But so I had to go out and find a milk cow with a full udder. And luckily, we live in a county that is possible to find. And so that was, you know, that, and being able to found people that were willing to let me photograph their tobacco farms. And I got my friend Alma to let me photograph her hands with larkspur seeds in them, because that fit the story. So the images came to fit, to try to fit the stories were the key thing. So.
Well, wonderful. I think Catherine has said there's somebody who has a question online. So Catherine, I will put it over to you.
So Jeannie Pirtle asked, is there a story in particular from the book, Meredith, that maybe most people from Southern Maryland might be unfamiliar with?
Maybe that's very Southern Maryland specific.
I don't know what that would be. I mean, I think there may be more than one, but I mean, it depends on, there's one, the pipe, which we have an image of. If you want to put up the next, I think it's the next image. Oh no, that's snow. Okay. That actor, yeah. But if you ever go to historic St. Mary City, you will be familiar with this kind of pipe. So yeah, I'm not thinking anything that would be particularly surprising. I'll have to think about that. I could talk a little bit more about the inspiration because Jeannie was certainly a part of that. I realized that I mentioned the interview with Agnes Kane-Callum, and that's where the fundamental question that I was following came from, and that was we interviewed her for at least a half an hour, maybe close to an hour, and she had talked so much about her ancestors who were here and all that they had done and accomplished and how proud she was of them. And then I said, well, if we just had a few minutes to talk to a Sotterley visitor about what's the most important thing to say about your ancestors. And she said that they survived. They survived the system of slavery. And I thought, okay, wow. And the more I thought about just how gigantic a job that was to survive, I thought I really would like to know more about how they did that. And so that was the question that I followed. What sort of, sorry, is it dry? Where?
Take your time.
More water?
So
where?
right behind you.
Oh, I see.
That
I
is
see.
your glass.
Thank you. I believe it's slippery. Okay. Is there dust in here by any chance?
Probably.
So,
it is a barn. I'm sure there is dust.
I'm allergic to dust. So, what was I talking about? So, the interview, the survival. And really, everything grew out of that. But then the more I thought about it, that exhibit that we keep mentioning in the corn crib, that allowed me to do 2 years of research about slavery and the workers at Sotterley and the post-slavery as well. And that gave me a lot of information that I, being an educator at heart, wanted to pass on. And then also the GU 272 people, thank you, thanks, I could use that. The GU 272 group, are you familiar with that? Yes. The people from the Jesuit plantations. I included some stories from their experiences. And when I met with them, I really felt their frustration in not being able to find out more about the lives, the everyday lives of their ancestors. So I I wanted to try to find something that would help them know a little bit more about what those lives were like. So I was very much motivated to share what I had learned and also to honor the memories of these people who, I mean, for every person that is doing this wonderful genealogy work and learning about their ancestors, and it's just opened up tremendously. You know, so many more people are learning these very exciting stories. Their journey is a personal journey, but it's very different than what I was doing or what I'm able to offer. And then also sites like Sotterley, for example, being able to, they're all kind of ways of commemorating and remembering, and they're all important and they're all different. So I would never have the personal excitement of being able to find out, you know, keep moving back farther and farther into my family's past is a very different search than trying to learn about this system, which involved everyone who was alive at the time, right? And is our history as Americans. So I was actually, but specifically, I would say those three things: the interview with Agnes and getting to know her and learning from her, and then the work on doing that exhibit, and then getting to know and working with the descendants, the 272 descendants, as well as Sotterley descendants. It's not going away.
So the GU 272, for those who are not as familiar with it. So Georgetown, the Jesuits who were running Georgetown University sold enslaved to keep the Georgetown going, sold them down to Louisiana. And it was a very hidden secret for a long time. And this has started to come, it came to the surface, and Georgetown has been doing a lot to try to not only be honest about this, but try to find a way to maybe make amends in some way. So there's that's what Merideth is referring to. And interestingly, a lot of our Sotterley descendants are also connected with the GU 272. So there's a lot of connection here in Southern Maryland with that. So it's what we found, and what I think, Merideth, your book may highlight a little bit are the connections that do exist. That the stories you're telling are not just Southern Maryland stories, though they're based here. There was a national system.
Definitely, but actually a lot less has been written about the tobacco plantations and particularly Southern Maryland. So I was very aware of that, and there are not a lot of slave narratives from this area. So so I do think I think this area was important and has some unique aspects, as well as being characteristic of a national problem. I would just say that on the same theme there, in terms of what inspired me or what I hoped would come out of it, that I have one thing to read to you from James Baldwin in a letter to his nephew James, written in 1962 on the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation. James Baldwin speaks of a crime committed by his countrymen, a crime for which neither I nor time nor history will ever forgive them, that they have destroyed and are destroying hundreds of thousands of lives and do not know it and do not want to know it. It is not permissible that the authors of devastation should also be innocent. It is the innocence which constitutes the crime. Had to think a lot about that. But, and then at the same time, Agnes Callum Those people who were slaves, they survived a system that was really cruel. I think they deserve to be remembered and all accolades bestowed upon them. My people that are living today, they are proud. They are proud of our ancestors and the things that they did. So I am hoping that the work has helped people to recognize the crime, to trouble the innocents, as they say, and at the same time to salvage the pride. Because, a lot of people would say, oh, we should tear Sotterley down. I mean, they and literally did say this. And because it was awful and it was painful and we don't want to be reminded of it. And what happens? And Agnes Callum was able to convince people that that was not the right thing to do, and that the link to her history and to this history that she was proud of was here. And to tear down the slave cabin, I meant the slave cabin, not necessarily all of Sotterley. No, the mansion's fine. No, tear down the slave cabin. So, I think that when we try to do away and not teach the history, which is exactly what's happening, right, in parts of the country, and now in Maryland, in Harford County, which I know nothing about, but the Board of Education just voted to eliminate the AP African American History course. So even in Maryland, of course, Maryland is Southern, really. But what is lost when we don't teach about history? It's not about people feeling good or feeling bad, but it is our history. And there are many reasons to, Lonnie Bunch, and I mean, I can't believe this is true, but I heard him say in a speech that slavery is a success story. And it was like, what? And I could see what he meant, because the ability to survive and to build the country and to create a culture together, it is, you can see how one could look at it that way, which is a totally different way than I have ever heard anybody else talk about it or look at. So I feel like there are many different ways to commemorate, and that my book is one of them. Questions?
Coming over just 1 second. I am on my way.
Just one quick question. In a couple of the stories you told, I was ready for something terrible or bad to happen. When you talked about that slave with the broom on the porch, and she convincing that, a lot of the slaves couldn't go out in the field, and that the guys in the wagon were getting all upset because, they had to get the crops in. I said, oh, here comes something bad. But nothing bad happened. And then when you showed the boat and you said, oh, people may be trying to escape. Are there any stories of escapes that were maybe successful, but then again, maybe not successful? And what happened when they weren't successful? Was Agnes able to elucidate for her ancestors any of those possibilities?
I did specifically steer away from a lot of violence, because I feel like there has been a lot already told, and what that tends to do is it brings pain to people when they read it, and it's not necessarily productive or instructive pain. Now, I think that a lot of the stories show a terrible cruelty. They're full of pain, but it's not a pain of violence. Although there's one where one of the enslaved people kills, one of the masters. There's a hanging. So there is an attack, and you know, and then there's an evidence of rape. I mean, but those stories, if you focus on that, you lose something else. And there has to be a point in bringing up something terrible or something violent. And what is it going to teach? And it seems to me that what we've been saying about slavery is, oh, it was horrible, it was terrible, we did terrible things, you know, and people were abused, and so let's not think about it or learn about any of the nuances of what really, you know, just being. I mean, how can any of us really imagine, we can't really, what it's like to be owned by or own another human being? You know, how do you show that? How do you show that kind of horror, you know? And I don't think it's by showing an attack necessarily.
So we have another question back here. Just one second.
I think in a roundabout way, you probably have answered the question that I'm about to ask. As more and more people in our community encounter your story, what are some of the conversations that you hope to inspire? What could you say to people to help them work through some of the tough stuff and understanding that it must be worked through for us to get to the other side?
I feel you might have some insight on that, actually, to share. I think I guess my feeling is that reading it, whatever your position and your history, that I feel like people can relate to it, and that it does have a tendency to create empathy. And it creates empathy. And I don't really know how exactly you would discuss it. I think it would be great to do that. I think my emphasis is not as much on healing as a lot of conversations have been, and more on learning what it might have been. But I'd love to hear your ideas about how you might do that. That's something I could think more about.
So for further conversation on that. I'll be right up here, Dave, for you in just one moment before I head up. Catherine, you had another question from the back?
So we had one of our viewers ask if you could talk a little bit about a particular story, The Informant, which is set at a Jesuit plantation.
Okay. I don't know if I probably would take me forever to find it. It's related to the Jesuit enslaved and the fact that there were a lot of court cases that went on, and there was a charge of a pregnancy of an enslaved woman by a Jesuit priest, and I'm not really, I don't have all the details on that or remember them all, but I wanted to have something that would, I was trying to think of all the types of behaviors that might, negative behaviors that might develop in this situation. And of course, there are a lot of them. And that there would have to be negative behaviors developed amongst the enslaved as well as enslavers. And so this young woman, there's a picture of a cross, which is a real relic. And she's in the priest's bed by herself. kind of just enjoying the linens and everything. And it's not real clear, but there's this suggestion that she that she sells information in a sense. Like she gets favors from her enslavers by providing information. And so, I mean, the thing is, I realized that I don't have very, I don't want to make like that every enslaved person was noble because they were enslaved. I mean, think about what the system did to corrupt people. And it corrupted everybody. It had to corrupt everybody in some way. So in this case, that woman has been corrupted. It's not clear whether she sleeps in that bed with the priest or not, but it's kind of suggested because we pretty sure that happened. So, and in fact, of course, we know that the priests were human beings and capable of all kinds of human behavior. So, including selling people, buying, selling people.
So our next question comes from one of Sotterley's most prolific historians and book writers, authors, and former trustee, Dave Brown. Sorry, Dave, you were going to get that.
Meredith, I have not read your book yet. I'm looking forward to it. And listening to you tonight really intrigues me. But it seems from some of the vignettes that you read to us that you're not only describing what was happening in certain circumstances, but you're trying to get into the mind of the African Americans who are going through it and give us some understanding of what they may have been thinking about while these things were happening. And I can't think of anyone better than you to do that for us because you've been so deeply immersed in this subject for so long and worked so closely with many African Americans. But still, I wonder if there were times when you said to yourself, did I understand their circumstances and what they were thinking right, or did I miss something? And if you had those circumstances, who did you turn to corroborate the way you were thinking about it?
Good question. So, obviously that was a question that I thought about. Because of this history we have is not good. So, first of all, I did not take this lightly by any means. And so my history is, I was from childhood raised by anti-racist educators and who we were kind of run out of a town in a small town in Arkansas because of their anti-racist behavior. And I was a baby. So it was kind of, I had a head start in some ways, but I've been working with a majority African-American group, Unified Committee for Afro-American Contributions, since 1996. And I have studied African-American history and contributed to the African Diaspora Studies program at St. Mary's College. And I did a huge amount of research, and I read probably, mostly African-American writers for many years. So, I mean, I am not, my perspective will never be as an African-American, I am not. But I invested a lot of research and a lot of time spent. And then the other important thing is that I shared the manuscript with descendants, with African-American descendants. And that was very important to me. So I did that early on, and I had them read it, and I asked them to respond. And I also relied on the response from Iris Ford, who is an African-American anthropologist. And people just had basically very, very positive responses. The descendants that read it felt that that it represented their people well. They felt that it was painful, but kind of in a good way, quote unquote. And so they had very positive responses. So I would not have gone forward without sharing it with African American descendants of enslaved, and or if they had, or I would have taken, their advice or whatever their response had been. So I did take it. I knew that I was, definitely on a stepping over a line that people have tended not to want to step over or have trounced on way too much. And some of the people that have influenced me, Audre Lorde, the poet, she says something about, I don't have it with me, but she said, how often has a white person, she's talking about academics, a white woman said, I can't teach Black women's literature because they're just, we don't have anything in common. And how often has a Black woman said, what would a white woman have to say to me about this? Why would I ask her? And she ends up saying, or if I'm not a gay person, how can I write about someone who's LGBTQ? And but she said, all the other ways that we lose each other because we don't want to step across the line, and that we should be able to imagine each other. We should be able to read and honestly try to understand and share that which is there. That we have to be willing to try to cross that line. And I it's like, wow, this person's really smart and I trust her. So, but again, you have to invest. You have to invest a lot of time. I mean, I have spent a lot of time with people that can advise me. So, good question. Yeah, Joy.
Joy, oh, hang on.
On that note, I just wanted to thank you so very much for writing this book. When you're talking about how you passed it on to your friends such as Iris, and myself reading the book and hearing what visitors are responding to the book, I just like the foreword by Dr. Ellis and how he's comparing your work to Toni Morrison. And it's just, it's not another story based on the horrors of slavery, but it's based on the triumph and, the resilience. And I appreciate that.
Oh, that's
and
great.
One more question. Is that from Cordea's Hope? Is that picture taken in Cordea's Hope?
It is.
Yeah, it looked very familiar.
I said you have broken one.
For those of you who aren't familiar with the quote, so Dr. Rex Ellis came from the Smithsonian, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Smithsonian, came here for the Land, Lives, and Labor unveiling. And this is what he wrote from the foreword from this book. In the refreshing journey of making a way out of no way, Taylor appropriately hints at context, but does not wallow in the details of the most comprehensive story of man's inhumanity to man. Like Toni Morrison, she sees the joy and triumphs of survival in the midst of pain. She offers slices of life combined with visual images that provide metaphors for the reality of life, and offers an answer to how the enslaved survived a brutal system that attempted to dominate and dehumanize them.
Yes, I was so thrilled, and I worked very hard at getting someone like Rex Ellis to write the foreword, and also there is an essay also written by E. Ethelbert Miller, who's a wonderful African American poet in D.C. And in fact, I sent him. He was one of the earliest people that I sent the manuscript to, and he was really like, kind of a few namby-pamby kind of comments, and it was like, oh, you're the only one that has responded like this. So then I wrote to him again after, but then, when it was really done and I was ready, I wrote to him again and I said, this is really weird because you are the only one that did not respond with a lot of enthusiasm. But I'm asking you, would you write a foreword? And he did. And then I guess he really read it and he decided that it was good. So that was really important because I know how difficult it is to accept a writer that looks like me writing about this, And I just think that we have to start being with care, willing to write about each other, to talk about each other.
Any other questions? Was there one over? Did I miss a question? Hugh Davies, the chair of the Southern Maryland Equity and History Coalition. I had to put that plug in here.
Well, we were very fortunate in our work to have Merideth be a close partner with us in our work on the website and so forth. So we really appreciate that. My thoughts kind of run to some of the other literature that is available about this part of the country, such as Charles Ball. And the very beginning of Charles Ball's book is about his being taken away from his mother and what that was like. When we think about GU 272, we think, oh, isn't that just awful that 272 people were sold south? Well, the reality was there were thousands of people sold south. And that was kind of and what that represented was the tearing apart of families. And that family was like a theme through a lot of what you were talking about. So I wanted you to kind of reflect on family and how that affected your work.
Yeah, well, thank you. When I looked at what I tried to figure out, how did they survive? What was it? Well, their ability and determination to form families and to make families in whatever way they could was certainly a primary reason that they were able to survive and to thrive and even thrive in many ways. So and that's where the joy and the love does have its place in that. And yeah, the title, Lives of Labor, Love, and Resistance, all three of those things were so important. And their lives were lives of labor. I mean, so not to talk about that. And very few works about slavery actually talk in any detail about the actual, just the day-to-day labor. And so, and sometimes, I hear people say, well, I wasn't interested in hearing about my ancestors in slavery because I just thought they were, workers in the field. And there's a kind of a classism in that, or a sense that because, these people who had no control over where they were placed, that somehow the fact that they were workers in the field meant that they were, it's like taking the slave owner's position of they're not really worth anything, but actually the workers in the field are just as important and just as much people as any of the people that were in the house. And sometimes I think people tend to look down on and to think of slavery that it has a stigma. Like a lot of people that UCAC has done oral histories on, they don't talk about their family in terms of slavery. They don't go that far back. And one of the reasons is because there was a stigma to talk about that you were a slave. And it's as if that was their failing. There was something wrong with them, you know, and otherwise, why would it be a stigma that they were thought of that way? And so that's why it's really important to think about those human beings and the value of their lives and the kinds of lives they created, no matter what, you know, they were given so little choice and so little opportunity, almost none. And yet they found a way to make it work, and as best they could. So does that answer?
I think there is a question in the back. Catherine, you had one?
Yes, ma'am. Corey asked, Meredith, you mentioned your parents and your upbringing. How has what you know of your own family history influenced the work that you do? You're telling a very intense and inclusive history. How has your own family background inspired that?
Well, I would say just in terms of my family values, you know, sort of the family ethos was shaped pretty much with the, you know, they were leftists ahead of their time, and, you know, they would drag us to meetings with, you know, 12 people who were talking about socialism or anti-racism. And I would say that I'm not particularly interested in my own family genealogy. I feel that I was very much influenced by the culture and experience of the way that I was reared. But, you know, I think part of it is like, because I could find out more if I wanted to. I am not passionate about trying to follow that line back. But certainly the way you're raised, anybody, I think, affects pretty much everything about how you develop. And certainly I was encouraged to actually, I'd say that my family really were kind of like took the side of the underdog. You know, there was always, I actually created a character in a play that I created with students at St. Mary's College. And the character was called Righteous Woman. And she would come in on a scooter. And there was a little song, Righteous Woman, righting all the wrongs. And I thought, well, you know, who's that based on? Me. So, but I mean, it was humor. Not everybody thought it, you know, got the satire, I guess. But so my parents had a lot to do with it. And I was really aware of a lot of inequities from the start. My mother was a teacher, and she, when we went to Arkansas, they would pack up the used books that were all ratty and written in and ship them off to the black schools, you know. And so I was really aware of that inequity and aware of the crime, as opposed to not aware of the crime for all my life. But I was interested in other things, performing, theater, myself, you know, so. But that'd be my answer to Corey. Did I answer your question, though? Yeah, okay. Well.
Anybody else? Well, Meredith, I am just so honored that you shared this story, and that it's based on the stories that we hold dear here at Sotterley that we try to tell. But it is about trying to encourage perspective. It's about stepping into somebody else's shoes and taking a moment to think about what life could have been like, would have been like, because you can't understand history unless you really try to do that. And I think it's one of the hardest things for all of us to try to do is understand, you know, step sideways, look at it from a different perspective. And I think you've tried to share that with us today. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Just incredible. So I'm so grateful to all of you for sharing tonight. Again, thank you to Toyota Southern Maryland for making, and Whiteford Systems. You guys are amazing. The fact that this all works, we can't. I am so technology stupid. You would have nothing if it was me. Thank you, Whiteford Systems. You guys are amazing. Thank you, Toyota Southern Maryland, for making this possible. And tell your friends, this will be available on our YouTube page. You're going to be able to share this performance with others. So make sure that you do that. We do have another a kind of a fun one coming up on August 7th. Our next speaker event is Dean Newman, who he's with our local Audubon Society. He helps do bird walks, and he is going to do Mama, Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Nature Photographers. So that is going to be on August 7th here in the barn. We do also have 2 specialty tours coming up. We have a medical history tour on the 19th, so just in a little over a week. We're going to be having a wonderful one that you can sign up. There's still space available. And an architectural mystery tour on August 2nd. So we want you, in fact, the person who's going to be doing that is with us tonight. He's hiding behind a pillar over there. It's going to be fabulous. So there's still space available for that as well. So we hope you join us. If you are interested in the book and you're not here tonight, do reach out to Museum Store at Sotterley.org, and Joy will take care of you. And for those who are here tonight, she will sign. She promises she will not leave until you get your signed copy. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for joining us.